Hey, old man, are you deaf? I said to clean up that mess by my BMW. The voice of the young man sliced through the silence of the college parking lot like a knife. I'm sorry, sir, the man in the blue janitor uniform quietly said, leaning over his mop. No, sir, here. Do you know how much this car costs? More than you'll earn in your pathetic life. Michael Whitmore, a 20-year-old son of a millionaire, stepped closer, his friends snickering behind him. The janitor continued to work silently, but something in his movements changed. His back straightened almost imperceptibly, and his fingers tightened around the mop handle a little more. Look, he's ignoring me. Michael shoved the man in the shoulder. Maybe I should remind you of your place, black man. The janitor slowly raised his head. Something flickered in his dark eyes that made Michael take a step back for a second. But only for a second. What are you looking at me like that for? Michael grabbed the mop and threw it into the bushes. Go get a new one before you what? Error. The janitor's voice sounded completely different, quieter, but with a hint of steel. The most interesting part is coming up. Stay with us to find out how it all ended. But for now, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. David Johnson had been working as a janitor at the elite St. Patrick's College for 8 months. Every morning he arrived at 6 a.m. when the campus was still asleep and began his rounds. Bathrooms, hallways, classrooms, all of it required attention and patience. But the students required the most patience. Hey, Mr. Clean, Bunchram, shouted a tall guy with a trendy haircut. It was Jason Mayfield, one of Michael Whitmore's close friends. You didn't clean the men's restroom on the 3rd floor properly yesterday. There was a drop of water by the sink. David lifted his head from the trash can he was emptying. He was 42 years old but looked older. Wrinkles around his eyes, a completely bald head, a weary gait. All of this created the image of a man broken by life. But that was just a mask. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayfield. I will fix it right now, he said with a slight accent, bowing his head. Yeah, and also, Jason carelessly threw a candy wrapper on the floor. There's trash. Clean it up. David silently picked up the wrapper and placed it in the trash bag. Something clenched inside him, but he had long learned to suppress those feelings. He had no choice. He needed this job, he needed the money, and most importantly, he needed to remain invisible. St. Patrick's College was a place where the children of wealthy and influential families studied. Tuition was $50,000 a year, not including room and board and additional expenses. Everything here breathed money and privilege, from marble floors to gold door handles. David knew this place like the back of his hand. In 8 months of work, he had studied every corridor, every classroom, every hidden corner. Janitors see everything. They are practically invisible to the students and professors who act as if the help doesn't exist. He knew where students hid drugs, where couples met, where professors drank coffee with cognac between lectures, but he remained silent about all of it. Silence was his protection. David, called Mr. Harris, the head of maintenance. Come here. David set down his cleaning cart and headed to Harris's office. He was a stout man in his 50s with a red face and a constantly displeased expression. Listen, I have complaints about you, Harris began without looking up from his papers. Students say you're not cleaning well. The gym was dirty yesterday, and the day before that, you missed dusting the shelves in the library. I clean all the areas thoroughly, Mr. Harris, David quietly replied. Perhaps it's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Harris finally looked up. Listen, I don't care about your problems. The children of very important people study here. Their parents donate millions of dollars to the college. If they are unhappy, I'm unhappy too. Got it? Got it, sir. And one more thing. Tomorrow we have a big event, a reception for the college trustees. There will be very important people there. Senators, businessmen, celebrities. You will be cleaning all day to make sure everything is perfect. And try to be inconspicuous. Guests should not see the staff. David nodded and left the office. The word staff grated on his ears, but he was used to such words. In 8 months of work, he had heard them enough. In the hallway, a new round of humiliation awaited him. A group of students, all from Michael Whitmore's families, stood by the fountain and laughed loudly. Oh, look, it's our favorite janitor, exclaimed Madison Blake, a girl with a perfect figure and an icy gaze. Her father owned a chain of hotels across the country. David, right? Hannah chimed in Ethan Ross, the son of a well-known lawyer. Tell me, how's life in the ghetto? Still dealing drugs? The laughter grew even louder. David clenched his fists but immediately relaxed them. He couldn't afford to lose control. Too much was at stake. "I'm not from the ghetto, Mr. Ross," he replied calmly. "Oh, right," Madison giggled. "But your parents aren't from there, are they? Tell us about your family. What do they do? Clean toilets too?" David felt something inside him grow cold. These kids had no idea what they were saying. They didn't know the pain their words caused. They didn't know he had a family. "My parents are dead," he said quietly. "Oh, how sad." Madison theatrically threw her hands up. "And siblings? A wife? Kids?" David remained silent. He couldn't talk about them. He couldn't and didn't want to. "Silent?" Ethan stepped closer. "Must be ashamed to talk about your loser relatives." "Leave him alone." Suddenly a voice rang out. Everyone turned. A girl in her 20s, short with chestnut hair and a serious expression, was approaching them. It was Sarah Jenkins, one of the few students who attended here on a scholarship. "Oh, look, our local activist has arrived," scoffed Madison. "Sarah, no one asked you." "I decide when to speak," Sarah replied firmly. "And right now I'm telling you, leave this person alone. He's doing his job." "Ah, what a touching defense," Ethan laughed. "Maybe you're in love with him. The romance of the century? A student and a janitor." Sarah blushed but didn't back down. "You're acting like children. Worse than children. You should be ashamed." "Ashamed?" Madison stepped forward. "We should be ashamed. We pay for our education. We have the right to demand quality service. And this," she pointed disdainfully at David, "isn't fulfilling his duties." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "He didn't clean the women's restroom well yesterday. There was a hair on the floor. A whole hair. Can you imagine?" David listened to this conversation and felt his rage boiling inside him. He knew there was no hair. He always cleaned thoroughly, checking every corner. But these kids were lying just for the pleasure of humiliating him. "That's not true," he suddenly said. Everyone fell silent. David surprised himself. He hadn't planned to speak. "What did you say?" Madison slowly pronounced. "I said it's not true. I clean all the premises thoroughly. I check every inch." "You dare to contradict us?" Ethan turned red. "You, the janitor, dare to say we're lying? Hey." "I'm telling the truth." David straightened up. Something in his voice changed, becoming firmer. "I do my job honestly." "You know what?" Madison pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my dad right now. He's on the college board. Let's see how long you last here after our conversation." "Madison, don't," Sarah tried to intervene. "This has gone too far." "Shut up," Madison snapped back. "Dad? Hi, it's me." "Yeah, everything's fine. Listen, we have a problem with the staff." David listened as the girl complained to her father and realized that his career at the college was coming to an end. He couldn't let that happen. This job was not just a source of income for him. It was a refuge, a place where he could hide from the past. "Mr. Ray, Blake says he will take care of this issue tomorrow," Madison reported, putting away her phone. "I think by tomorrow evening, we will have a new janitor." The group of students dispersed, leaving David and Sarah alone. "I'm so sorry," the girl said quietly. "I tried. Naram." "Thank you." David looked at her. "But you shouldn't have intervened. Now they're angry with you too." "I don't care. I can't stay silent when I see injustice." David studied her face. Sarah was unlike the other students. In her eyes, he saw sincerity, pain for others. Such people were rare. "Why did you stand up for me?" he asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," she simply replied. "And because," she hesitated, "because I know what it's like to be an outcast. They don't like me here either. I'm not from their world." "But you're a student. You have a future." "Yes, but at what cost?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Every day I listen to them talk about their yachts and parties, while I count every penny. My mom works 3 jobs so I can study here, and they don't even understand what privileges they have." David nodded. He understood this girl, and she seemed to understand him. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "I mean your full name." David Johnson." "And I'm Sarah Jenkins. Nice to meet you, David." They shook hands, and David was surprised by the firmness of her grip. Most students didn't even look at him, and this girl shook his hand as an equal. "Listen," Sarah said, "maybe I can help. Talk to the administration, explain the situation." "No," David quickly replied. Thank you, but it's not worth it. It will only make the situation worse. Mac, but they can't just fire you like that. You have rights. I have no rights, David said bitterly. I'm just a janitor. There are a dozen like me here. That's not true. Every person has dignity. David looked at her in surprise. When was the last time he heard such words? When did someone last talk to him about dignity? You're very kind, Miss Jenkins. But the world isn't always fair to kind people. Maybe, but that doesn't mean we should stop being kind. David wanted to say something in response, but at that moment the bell rang. Sarah looked at her watch. I have to go to a lecture. But David, if you need help, reach out, seriously. She left, and David was left alone. He stood in the empty hallway, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. Just in the morning, he was an invisible janitor, and now he had become a target for rich kids. But the worst part was that he was starting to lose control. For 8 months, he had kept himself in check, playing the role of a submissive worker. And now, because of one careless word, everything was falling apart. David returned to his cart and continued working, but his thoughts were far away. He thought about the past he was trying to forget, about the man he used to be, about the life he had lost. In the Army, he was called something else. Captain David Johnson, close combat specialist, hand-to-hand combat instructor. He served in an elite unit, carrying out missions that weren't reported in the news. He saved lives, protected the innocent, fought against terrorists, but all that was in another life, a life that ended one tragic evening in Afghanistan. David shook his head, pushing the memories away. The past was the past. Now he was just a janitor, and that was all that mattered. But as he cleaned the gym where those very students who mocked him trained, David couldn't help but notice their movements. Clumsy punches at the punching bag, incorrect stances, open, vulnerable spots. Any one of them would fall from one precise hit. David quickly pushed those thoughts away. He couldn't think like that. He was no longer a warrior. He was a janitor, and that was all he could afford to be. The day was coming to an end, and David headed towards the exit. Ahead of him lay a long evening in his small rented room, where he spent time reading books and trying not to think about the past. But at the exit, a surprise awaited him. A group of students stood by the doors, led by Michael Whitmore. They were clearly waiting for him. Here comes our hero, Michael smirked. I heard you were rude to my friends today? I wasn't rude to anyone, David replied, trying to walk past. Stop, Michael blocked his way. We're not done talking yet. Mr. Whitmore, I just want to go home. The workday is over. Home? Michael laughed. To your rat hole? You know I did some digging on you. You live in that dump on the outskirts of town, right? In the area where they deal drugs? David clenched his fists. How does this guy know where he lives? Sort of, my dad knows a lot of people in this town. Michael continued as if reading his thoughts. And you know what? He can make sure you don't get a job anywhere. Not in any place in this city. What do you want? David asked quietly. An apology, a public apology. Tomorrow in front of everyone, you will kneel and ask for forgiveness for your behavior. I'm not guilty of anything. You are guilty, Michael exploded. You dared to argue with us. Nobody dared to tell us we were wrong. Michael, maybe that's enough, Johnny, one of his friends said uncertainly. We've already... Shut up, Matt, Michael barked. This black guy needs to know his place. The word Asian, spoken with such hatred, hit David like a slap. He slowly raised his head and looked Michael straight in the eye. Repeat that, he said quietly. Sanami, what? Michael hesitated for a moment. Repeat what you just said. I said you need to know your place, Black. Michael regained his confidence. And your place is... He didn't get to finish the sentence. David stepped forward, and something in his movement made Michael fall silent. The janitor no longer looked submissive and beaten. His back was straight, shoulders squared, and there was a fire in his eyes that made even the cocky Michael take a step back. You know what, Mr. Whitmore? David's voice was calm, but it had a steely edge. You're right, everyone has their place, and tomorrow you will find out what place you occupy. With those words, David turned and walked away, leaving the group of students in confusion. They didn't understand what had just happened, but they all felt that something had changed. And David walked through the dark streets of the city, thinking that the mask of submission no longer worked. He had endured humiliation for too long, remained silent for too long, but every person has a limit, and his limit had been reached. Tomorrow would be a new day, And that day would change everything. David sat in his small room, staring at the photograph he had held in his hands for over an hour. The picture showed a young, dark-skinned woman with a gentle smile and a little girl about 5 years old. They stood in front of a white house with a red roof, and the sun illuminated their faces. "May, Lily," he whispered, tracing his finger over the glass of the frame. "Forgive me." This was the only photograph he had taken with him when he left his home in San Diego. Everything else, the house, the car, the military awards, even the graves of his wife and daughter, he had left in the past. But he couldn't leave this photograph behind. May was an elementary school teacher. They met when David returned from his first tour of duty in Iraq. She was a volunteer at a veterans rehabilitation center, helping soldiers adjust to civilian life. David had gone there at the insistence of an Army psychologist, but stayed because of her. "You know," she told him then, "war doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It ends when you stop fighting with yourself." Those words struck a chord deep within him. May was the only person who understood him without words. She didn't ask about the war, didn't try to pull stories about battles from him. She was just there, and that was enough. They got married a year later. Lily was born 2 years after that. David remembered every second of that day, how he held his tiny daughter in his arms, how she squeezed his finger with her little hands, how May smiled as she looked at them. "Now you have another reason to come home," she told him before his last deployment, and he came back, but not as he had planned. David closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. Afghanistan, the hostage rescue operation. Everything went wrong. His squad was ambushed, and David made a decision that haunted him every night. He could save his men or the civilians, not both. He chose the civilians, an Afghan family including 3 children. His soldiers died covering the retreat. 5 good men who trusted him, who followed him into the fire. The Army investigation deemed his actions justified. He even received a medal for heroism. But what good is a medal when your men are dead? David returned home a broken man. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look his wife and daughter in the eye. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow seemed like an enemy. May tried to help. She found the best specialists, took him to psychologists, supported him every day. But David grew more distant. He started drinking, spent days in the garage, avoided people. "David, please," May pleaded. "Talk to me. Tell me what's going on." "You won't understand," he replied. "No one will understand. Try. Give me a chance to understand." But he couldn't. How do you explain to your wife that you see the faces of dead soldiers every night? How do you tell her that you feel guilty for surviving when they did not? Everything changed on a rainy evening in October. May was picking Lily up from school. David was home, drinking whiskey and staring out the window. The phone rang at 8 o'clock. "Mr. Chang, this is from St. Joseph's Hospital. Your wife and daughter were in a car accident." Everything after that was like a blur. The hospital, the doctors, the words, "We did everything we could." May died on the way to the hospital. Lily lasted 3 days in a coma, and then she was gone too. David remembered standing by their beds in the hospital, realizing that this was the end of his world. It wasn't the war that broke him. It was the death of his family. He couldn't protect the people he loved most, couldn't be there when they needed him. After the funeral, he sold the house, resigned from the Army, and disappeared. No one knew where he had gone. He took his mother's surname, got new documents, started a new life, a life of a ghost. David opened his eyes and looked at the photograph. 2 years had passed since then. 2 years he had wandered the country, worked various jobs, avoided close relationships. He deserved solitude. He deserved pain. But today something changed. When Michael Whitmore called him an Asian with such hatred, something inside David awakened. The anger he had suppressed for so long. He stood up and walked over to the old Army trunk that stood in the corner of the room. Inside were things from his past life. Uniform, medals, photographs of comrades. And something else. David pulled out a small black notebook. It contained notes on training, combat techniques, psychological methods, his personal diary as a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Remember, the goal of the fight is not to cause pain. The goal is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Strength without purpose is just cruelty. Strength with purpose is justice. He had written those words many years ago when he was preparing young soldiers for their first battle. Back then, he believed in those words. He believed in justice, in protecting the weak, in the idea that there are things worth fighting for. Then he lost that faith. But today, seeing rich kids bully people who couldn't fight back, he felt old beliefs returning. David closed the notebook and lay down on the bed. Tomorrow would be a difficult day. Tomorrow he would have to make a choice, to continue hiding or to stand up and fight. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he thought about Sarah Jenkins, the only person in college who stood up for him. She reminded him of May, just as kind, just as principled. Every person has dignity, she had said. When was the last time he heard such words? When was the last time someone spoke to him as an equal? David turned on his side and looked at the photograph of his wife and daughter. "What would you do in my place?" he whispered. "May, you always knew what was right. Tell me what to do." But there was no answer. Only the quiet noise of the night city outside the window and the weight of memories in his heart. David got up and began to do what he hadn't done in 2 years. Exercises, push-ups, squats, stretching. His muscles ached from long inactivity, but his body remembered. It remembered strength, speed, the precision of movements. He trained until dawn, until he was sweating and out of breath. Then he took a shower, put on his janitor uniform, and went to work. But he was no longer the same person who had worked here yesterday. He was someone else, someone who remembered what it meant to fight for a just cause. St. Patrick's College looked especially solemn in the morning. Flags and banners hung everywhere. Today was a big day, a reception for trustees and sponsors. The wealthiest and most influential people in the city were supposed to come here to discuss the future of the institution. David arrived at work earlier than usual. He wanted to finish all the cleaning before the event started. Mr. Harris met him at the entrance. "Listen, Johnson," he began without preamble. "I have bad news for you. Mr. Blake called yesterday. He is unhappy with your work." "I understand," David replied calmly. "You understand?" Harris was surprised. "Do you realize what this means? You're fired. After today, you don't need to come back." "Okay." Harris frowned. He expected pleas, excuses, maybe even tears. But David stood calmly and looked at him indifferently. "Okay?" Harris asked again. "Don't you understand? You're losing your job." "I understand. Can I finish today? I want to do everything well one last time." Harris nodded, bewildered. This conversation was not going as he had planned. "Yes, of course, and try to be inconspicuous. The guests shouldn't see the staff." David took his cart and began to work. But today he was cleaning differently. He studied each room, each corridor, memorizing the locations of the cameras. Exits, blind spots. Old skills were returning. Military training, the ability to analyze the terrain, plan an operation. David didn't understand why he needed this, but instinct told him, prepare. At 8:30 in the morning, the first guests began to arrive. David watched from around the corner as expensive cars pulled up to the main entrance. Men and women in expensive suits got out. The elite of the city. "Hey, janitor," called a familiar voice. David turned around. Michael Whitmore was approaching him, accompanied by his friends. Today he was dressed even more provocatively. A pricey suit, gold watch, a self-assured smile. "Heard you're getting fired?" Michael smirked. "Too bad you didn't get to apologize. Now it's too late." "It's never too late," David replied calmly. "What?" Michael didn't understand. "I said it's never too late. For apologies, too." "Oh, right," Michael laughed. "You want to apologize? Go ahead, I'm listening." David set aside his mop and turned to the group of students. He straightened up and his posture changed. There was no longer submission in his movements, no humility in his eyes. "I want to apologize," he began slowly, "for staying silent for so long, for allowing you to think that you can humiliate others without consequence." Michael frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I apologize for not telling you the truth earlier, the truth about who you really are." "Listen, you're cowards," David continued, not raising his voice. "You only attack those who can't retaliate. You hide behind your parents' money, their connections, and influence. Without all of that, you're nobody." Silence hung in the corridor. Michael's friends exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. They hadn't expected this. "You've lost your mind," Michael finally said. "You've just lost your mind." "Maybe, but do you know what's the scariest part? You will grow up and become just like your parents. You will think that money gives you the right to humiliate others. And your children will be just like that." "Shut up," Michael exploded. Shut up immediately. Or what? David stepped forward. What will you do? Tell Daddy? Call Mommy? Michael turned crimson with rage. He clenched his fists and stepped toward David. I'll show you what I'll do. He swung to hit, but David didn't even flinch. Michael's fist hung in the air just inches from the janitor's face. Hit me, David said quietly. Go ahead. Hit a defenseless man. Show everyone how brave you are. Michael stood frozen. Something in David's eyes stopped him. There was no fear, no pleading. There was only cold determination. What's going on here? An authoritative voice rang out. Everyone turned. A man in his 50s in an expensive suit approached them. David recognized him from photographs in the newspapers. Richard Blake, Madison's father, one of the richest men in the city. So do you, Dad, Madison exclaimed, who also approached the group. I'm so glad you're here. This man is behaving inappropriately. What happened? Blake asked, surveying the scene. This janitor is insulting students, Michael quickly said. I just told the truth, David calmly interrupted him. Mr. Blake, your daughter and her friends are bullying the college staff. They lie, insult, and humiliate people. Blake scrutinized David. All right, and you think you have the right to lecture my daughter? I think every person deserves respect, regardless of how much money their parents have. I see, Blake nodded. Do you know who I am? I do. Richard Blake, owner of the Blake International hotel chain, a member of the college board, one of the largest donors. Correct. And do you know what I can do to you? You can fire me, which you already have. Not just that, Blake smiled coldly. I can make sure you won't get hired anywhere in this city. Nowhere in this state. Do you understand? I understand. And that doesn't scare you? David looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Blake, I've seen things that are truly frightening. The threats of a rich man are not among them. Blake frowned. This janitor was unlike the others. There was no fear in his voice, no pleading in his eyes. There was something else that made even such an influential man as Blake feel uncomfortable. Mr. Blake, a voice intervened. Everyone turned. Sarah Jenkins was approaching them. She looked anxious but determined. Miss Jenkins, Blake nodded. What are you doing here? I want to say that Mr. Johnson is telling the truth. Your daughter and her friends are indeed bullying the staff. I've seen it myself many times. Sarah, don't get involved, Madison hissed. This doesn't concern you. It does concern me, Sarah replied firmly. When I see injustice, it concerns me. Miss Jenkins, Blake said, you are here on a scholarship, correct? Yes. And you understand that this scholarship can be revoked? Sarah paled but did not back down. I understand, but I can't stay silent. David looked at the girl with admiration. She was risking her future for a principal. For him, a man she barely knew. Enough, he said. Miss Jenkins, it's not worth it. I'm already fired. I have nothing to lose. But you have a future. But it's wrong, Sarah protested. They can't. They can, Blake interrupted her. And they will. Miss Jenkins, consider your scholarship revoked. And you, Mr. What was it? Johnson, you can pack your things. No, Sarah exclaimed. You can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong. You insulted my daughter, Blake replied coldly. That's more than enough reason. Sarah burst into tears. All her dreams, all her plans were crumbling before her eyes. David couldn't bear it. He saw how this girl was suffering because of him, and something inside him broke. Stop, he said quietly, but everyone heard. What? Blake asked again. I said stop. David stood tall. You've gone too far. And what are you going to do? Blake asked mockingly. Are you going to sue? Do you have money for a lawyer? No, David shook his head. I'll do something else. He took his phone out of his pocket and turned on the recording. What are you doing? Blake asked, alarmed. I'm recording our conversation, especially the part where you threaten a student for telling the truth. I think the newspapers will be very interested in this story. You wouldn't dare. Besides, recording without consent might be illegal. Maybe, David agreed. But public opinion doesn't always follow the letter of the law. Millionaire threatens scholarship student for defending janitor against racism. A good headline, don't you think? Blake paled. This isn't racism. This is... Your son called me black with such hatred that everyone around heard it. There are plenty of people here who can confirm that. Want me to find witnesses? What the hell do you want from me? Blake growled. Justice, David simply replied. Miss Jenkins stays in college. Her scholarship is not revoked, and your children will learn to respect other people. And what if I refuse? I know. Then tomorrow morning this recording will be on all the news programs in the city, and not just in this city. Blake stood there, fists clenched. He wasn't used to being dictated terms. Rage flickered in his eyes, but so did calculation. The scandal could seriously damage his reputation, especially in light of the civil rights movement. His hotels could suffer from boycotts. Do you understand that I can destroy you in other ways? He said slowly. I have connections in the police, in the mayor's office. I understand, David replied calmly. But then it would look like revenge, which would only confirm the truth of my words. Blake was silent for several long seconds, weighing his options. Fine, he finally said through clenched teeth. Miss Jenkins stays, but you're still fired. That works for me, David nodded. I have just one last condition. What is it? I want to talk to your children, alone. 5 minutes. Why? To explain something important to them. About life, about the consequences of actions, about how money doesn't make a person better. Blake hesitated. Dad, don't, Madison whispered. He's crazy. 5 minutes, David repeated, or I publish the recording right now. Okay, Blake agreed. 5 minutes, but I'll be right there. No, alone. No way. Then goodbye, Mr. Blake. Nice to meet you. David turned as if he was going to leave. Wait, Blake shouted. Fine, 5 minutes. But if you lay a finger on them, I won't harm them, David promised. I have other methods. Blake reluctantly nodded and stepped aside, pulling the other adults with him. David was left alone with a group of students, Michael, Madison, Jason, Ethan, and a few others. So, Michael smirked. You think you can scare us? My dad has tons of money and connections. I know, David nodded. Now listen to me carefully. He stepped forward and his voice changed. It became quieter, but more threatening. You think your parents' money will protect you from everything, but that's not true. In the real world outside this college, no one cares who your dad is. That's not true, Madison protested, but there was uncertainty in her voice. It is true. And do you know what else is true? You are weak, physically, morally, psychologically. You've never faced real problems, never fought for something important. And what are you, tough? Jason sneered. You're just a janitor. David slowly took off his rubber gloves and placed them on the cart. Then he rolled up his shirt sleeves. Scars became visible on his forearms. Thin lines that could only have been made by a knife, and larger marks from bullets. The students fell silent, staring at the scars. You're right, David said. I'm a janitor. But once I was someone else. Someone who knows what real pain, real fear, real death is. He stepped up close to Michael. The guy tried to back away, but his back hit the wall. Do you want to know what I used to do? David whispered. I killed people. Professionally. By order of the government. You're lying, Michael stammered. I'm not lying. I served in special forces. I know numerous hand-to-hand combat techniques. And believe me, you don't want to test my skills in practice. Michael trembled. You can't. That's a threat. It's not a threat, David said calmly. It's information. I'm telling you about my past, about who I really am. He stepped away from Michael and looked at the others. You've been mocking me for 8 months. You thought I was weak, helpless, but I let you do it. Do you know why? No one answered. Because I was trying to be better, trying to forget my past, start a new life. But you didn't give me that chance. We were just joking, Madison stammered. We didn't know. Didn't know. David's voice became harsher. You didn't know you were causing pain? That you were humiliating a person? Or did you just not care? Or, we didn't care, Ethan quietly replied. We thought we had the right. Finally, some honesty. David nodded. Yes, you didn't care. And do you know what's the scariest part? In a few years, you'll be running companies, becoming politicians, judges, and you'll be just as indifferent to the suffering of others. What do you want from us? Michael asked in a trembling voice. I want you to remember this day. Remember that once you met a person who could have harmed you, but didn't. Remember that there are people in the world who are stronger than you, smarter than you, more experienced than you, but who choose good. David looked at his watch. Time's up. You can go to your parents. The students hurried away, but David called out to Michael. One more thing, he said. If I find out that you or your friends are bullying someone else, staff, other students, anyone, I will come back, and then the conversation will be different. But you were fired. I have ways of knowing what's happening at this college. Staff members who see everything and remember a lot. Keep that in mind. Michael nodded and ran off. David was left alone in the hallway. That was amazing. A voice came from behind him. He turned around. Sarah was standing at the corner of the hallway, her eyes shining with admiration. Did you hear everything? He asked. Not everything, but enough. Did you really serve in the army? I did. And did you really kill people? David paused. Wars make people do things they regret for the rest of their lives. But you defended our country. I thought I was defending, but sometimes it's hard to understand where defense ends and revenge begins. Sarah stepped closer. Thank you, she said, for standing up for me. You risked for a stranger. You also risked for me. That's different. I risked a scholarship, and you risked your past. You told them about something you probably didn't want to talk about. David nodded. She was right. Talking about his military past was painful, but sometimes you have to open old wounds to heal new ones. What will you do now? Sarah asked. I don't know. I'll probably leave this town. Start over somewhere else. Or maybe you shouldn't. She took his hand. Maybe you should stay and continue the fight? What fight? For justice. For people who can't defend themselves. You told those students the right words, but words need to be backed up by actions. David looked at their intertwined hands. This was the first human warmth he had felt in a very long time, and although they had only known each other for a day, something about this girl inspired trust in him. I'm not a hero, Sarah. I'm just a man with a painful past. Heroes aren't born. They become heroes when they make the right choice in a tough moment. And what if I make the wrong choice? Then I'll be there to remind you of the right one. David smiled. For the first time in a long time, he smiled sincerely. All right, I'll stay, but not as a janitor. As what then? As a person who knows what injustice is and is ready to fight against it. They stood in the empty college corridor, holding hands and planning their future. A future that had no room for bullying, humiliation, and indifference. A future worth fighting for. That day, David Johnson stopped being just a janitor. He became something more. A protector, a fighter for justice. A man who was not afraid to confront evil. And although his past still haunted him, he now had a future. A future with Sarah. A future with purpose. A future with hope. The mask of submission was removed forever. In its place remained the face of a warrior, not one who fights for money or fame, but one who fights for truth. A month after that memorable day, David sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, reading a newspaper. The front page boasted the headline, Scandal at Elite College, Investigation into Staff Bullying. The article recounted how a group of students at St. Patrick's College systematically humiliated the institution's staff, and how one of the janitors found the strength to stand up against it. The journalist did not name names, but David recognized the description of the events from that day. Are you reading about yourself? Sarah asked, joining him at his table. I'm reading about us, he corrected her. Without you, nothing would have happened. Nonsense. You would have managed without me. Perhaps, but managing and winning are different things. The victory was not just for me. Sarah smiled and took his hand. Over this month, they had grown very close. Not just as a man and a woman, but as two people who understood each other without words. What does it say? She asked. That the college administration is conducting an internal investigation, that several students have been temporarily suspended from classes, that an ethics committee has been established to address such cases. And what about Michael and the others? Michael has been transferred to another college. His parents decided that a change of scenery would do him good. Madison is undergoing mandatory psychological therapy. The others received stern reprimands. And that's it? Sarah exclaimed. They bullied people for months and only got a slap on the wrist? That's the reality, David replied calmly. Money still decides a lot in this world, but the main thing is, they know they are being watched, that their actions have consequences. And what about Mr. Blake? He was called to an internal board meeting for explanations. There was no official punishment, but his reputation suffered. They say he has become more cautious in his statements. David set the newspaper aside and looked at Sarah. And what about us? He asked. What do you mean? I mean, you have your studies, your future career, your plans for life. And I have none of that. But you have experience, wisdom, strength, and a kind heart, even though you try to hide it. Sarah, I'm serious. You're 20 years old. You're at the very beginning of life. And I'm 42. And I would like to forget most of my past. Age is just a number. And the past makes us who we are. Your past made you a person who is ready to fight for justice. My past made me a killer. No, Sarah said firmly. Your past made you a protector. You killed to save. You fought to protect the peace. And even now, when you think you have become a different person, you are still protecting the weak. David was silent, contemplating her words. You know what I've decided? He finally said. What? I want to open a center, a place where people who are bullied can get help, psychological, legal, and if needed, physical protection. That's a wonderful idea, Sarah exclaimed. But how will you fund it? I have some savings, military pension, insurance after my wife's death. I've never spent that money. I couldn't bring myself to. It's enough to start. Renting a space, basic equipment. After that, we'll look for sponsors, grants, maybe crowdfunding. And now can you? Now I know what to spend it on. May always said that money is a tool. What matters is not how much money you have, but how you use it. May is your wife? David nodded. He had told Sarah about his family a few days ago. It was painful, but necessary. He couldn't build new relationships while hiding his past. She would be proud of you, Sarah said quietly. Do you think so? I'm sure. You found a way to turn pain into strength, tragedy into hope. Will you help me? Of course. I'm studying psychology. It will be useful in working with victims of abuse. And you're not afraid to tie your life to someone with so much baggage? Sarah leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. I'm only afraid of one thing, that you'll decide you don't deserve happiness. Maybe I don't. That's not for you to decide. That's for those who love you to decide. The word love hung in the air between them. David looked into Sarah's eyes and saw sincerity, warmth, hope. You really? David hesitated, not daring to say the word love. It was too early for such words. I see a good person in you, she replied softly. A person who deserves happiness. A person who has been through a lot, but hasn't lost the ability to protect others. I also feel something special for you, David confessed. But I don't know how to build a relationship the right way. I'm afraid of losing someone again. You haven't lost them. They are always with you, in your heart. And I'm not going anywhere. David took her hands in his. They were so small, so fragile, but there was a strength in them that he admired. All right, he said, then let's build a future together. What kind of future? A future where no one has to suffer humiliation in silence, where everyone has a protector, where strength is used to defend the weak, not to oppress them. That's an ambitious plan. I have a good partner, David smiled. They left the cafe and walked down the street, holding hands. Ahead of them lay much work, many challenges, many difficulties. But they were no longer alone. They had each other. They had a purpose. They had hope. David Johnson was no longer an invisible janitor. He was a man who had found his calling. A man who understood that the greatest strength is not the ability to inflict pain, but the ability to heal it. And as they walked down the street, planning their aid center, discussing details and dreaming of the future, David thought about how life gives a second chance. Not to everyone, not always, but sometimes. And when that chance comes, one must have the courage to accept it. He accepted his chance, and now he was ready to help others accept theirs. Final scene. 6 months later, David stood in front of the mirror in his new office, adjusting his tie. Today was the grand opening of the Justice and Protection Center, a place he had created with Sarah. Are you nervous? She asked as she entered the office. A little. And you? Very. But it's a good kind of nervous. David turned and looked at her. Sarah was in a strict business suit, her hair in a bun, holding a folder of documents. She looked like a true professional. Ready to change the world, Mona? He asked. Ready to change at least a small part of it, she replied. And you? I'm ready to try. They stepped out of the office into the main hall of the center. People had already gathered there. Journalists, government representatives, public figures. But most of all, there were ordinary people, those who needed help and protection. David saw familiar faces. There stood Maria, the janitor from the hospital, who had endured months of insults from the chief doctor. Next to her was Tom, the mall security guard, who had been fired for standing up for a customer. And over there in the corner was a group of teenagers who had become victims of school bullying. So many people, Sarah noted. Too many, David replied sadly. That means the problem is more serious than we thought. Or that people have finally believed in the possibility of change. David took the microphone and addressed the gathered crowd. Friends, he began, 6 months ago, I was just a janitor at an elite college. I endured humiliation, stayed silent, hid. I thought it was normal, that this is life for people like me. The audience listened attentively. But then I realized that silence is not humility. It is complicity. When we remain silent in the face of injustice, we become part of it. Right, someone shouted from the audience. This center is created for those who are tired of being silent, for those who are ready to fight for their dignity. We do not promise easy victories or quick solutions. We promise that you will not be alone in your struggle. Applause filled the hall. We have lawyers for those who need legal assistance. We have psychologists for those who need emotional support. And we have people who will simply listen, understand, and support. David paused and looked at Sarah. But most importantly, we have faith that every person deserves respect, regardless of skin color, background, social status, or bank account size. What if those who hurt us are too strong? A woman from the audience asked. What if they have money, connections, power? David smiled. You know what I've realized over these months? The strongest people are not those with more money or connections. The strongest are those who are ready to stand for the truth, even when it is dangerous. But sometimes the truth is not enough, a man objected. Sometimes real strength is needed. You are right, David agreed. Sometimes strength is needed, but real strength is not fists or weapons. Real strength is unity. When we stand together, we cannot be broken. He pointed to those gathered in the hall. Look around. Here are hundreds of people, each with their own story, their own pain, their own struggle. But now we are not alone. Now we are a force. The applause grew even louder. So I urge you, do not be silent. Do not endure. Do not hide. Come to us, share your stories, ask for help, and help others when you can. David set down the microphone and descended into the audience. People immediately approached him. Some thanked him, others shared their stories, and some asked for advice. Mr. Chen, an elderly woman addressed him. Thank you for what you do. My grandson is being bullied at school, and I didn't know where to turn. Come to us, David said. Ooh, we will help. Did you really serve in the army? A teenager asked. Did you really fight? I served, but war is not something to be proud of. You should be proud of protecting peace, not destroying it. Mr. Chen, a journalist approached. May I ask a question for an interview? Of course. What has changed in your life over these 6 months? David looked at Sarah, who was talking to a group of students. I realize that everyone has a choice, he answered. You can hide from pain or turn it into strength. You can live in the past or build the future. You can be a victim or become a defender. And what choice did you make? I chose the future. I chose to defend those who need it. I chose love over hate. Isn't it scary to start a new life at your age? David smiled. You know, age is not an obstacle to change. Fear is the obstacle. And fear can be overcome. How? Find what is more important than fear. For me, it's justice and love. The journalist noted his words and thanked him. David continued to interact with the visitors, but his gaze kept returning to Sarah. In the evening, when everyone had left, they remained alone in the empty center. Tired? Sarah asked. Very, but it's a good tiredness. Do you think we will succeed? We will definitely succeed. We have everything we need. And what exactly? A goal, a team, and love. That's enough for any achievement. Sarah approached him and hugged him. I'm proud of you, she said. Proud of who you have become. I have become who I was always meant to be. It just took time to understand that. And me? You have always been amazing. You just helped me see it. They stood in each other's embrace, surrounded by silence and peace. Outside, the stars shone, promising a new day, new challenges, new opportunities. David Chen was no longer an invisible janitor. He was a man who had found his place in the world, a man who turned pain into strength and strength into protection for others. And this was just the beginning. The end epilogue a year later. The newspaper headline read, "Justice and Protection Center celebrates its first anniversary." The article detailed how, in just 1 year of operation, the center had helped over 150 people, won 8 court cases, and become a symbol of hope for those facing injustice. David read this article while sitting in the park next to the graves of May and Lily. For the first time in 3 years, he came here not with a sense of guilt, but with a sense of gratitude. "May," he quietly said, placing flowers on the grave, "I've found a way to move on. Not to forget you, but to live with your memory, to use that memory as a force for good." Sitting beside him was Sarah. She had also brought flowers and silently listened to his words. "Lily," David continued, "Dad is no longer hiding. Dad is fighting so that other children don't suffer from injustice. I think you would be proud of me." The wind rustled the leaves on the trees, and David thought he heard a soft child's laughter. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe it wasn't. "Ready to go?" Sarah asked. "Ready." They stood up and headed toward the exit of the cemetery. Ahead of them lay a new day of work, new people in need of help, new challenges, and new victories. David Johnson had finally found peace. Not the peace of the grave, but the peace of a man who knows why he lives. He was an invisible warrior, one who fights not for glory or rewards, but for every person's right to dignity and respect. And that was enough for happiness.